Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date and help the channel grow. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And now, on with the show. You are listening to the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion with the one and only Gray. Greetings, opinion nerds. It is I, the one they call Gray, and today we're asking, what was that all about with director Alex Garland's 2018 film Annihilation, here in the Gray area, coming up right now. There are times when the purpose of destruction is to make way for something new, opinion nerds. Annihilation, at least the word, is about destruction. In fact, the word as defined describes a complete and total breakdown of a thing into its smallest component parts. But despite being the title of director Alex Garland's 2018 science fiction drama, it's a word I find difficult to apply to the film. Since its release, there have been a handful of pieces which express a somewhat nihilistic view of the film's themes of destruction, specifically self-destruction. Annihilation seems to be one of those films where people become very interested in its component parts, what they mean and what they say as individual pieces. What is the shimmer? What is it doing to the land around it and the people who enter it? What's its purpose, if it even has one? What does the strange tattoo mean that seems to appear on certain people without reason? Who's real and who's not? If you dig a little further, you find more philosophical ponderings about the nature of the self and what it means to destroy the self or to be self-destructive. It's all fascinating to examine and can take you to some interesting intellectual places. The question is, are these things what the movie is about? Is the movie simply about destruction of the self-made variety or otherwise? Or is there a point to all this destruction of self? Is there life after annihilation? As a reminder, for our purposes, when we look to what a movie is about, we're looking for what it is the movie is attempting to share with the audience, whether that be a story or simply an experience. If the film is telling us a story, we then ask, what is the story that's being told and how do the elements of the film support the telling of that story? Story is the journey of the character across the film. Its arc formed by its beginning, middle, and end states. So to assess the story, we look at where the character or characters start, compare that to where they end, and then look back through the middle to see how they got there. There's nothing wrong with a film that doesn't have much of a story or even any story at all. The point is not to judge the film, but to understand it. If art is an expression, then what is the artist trying to express? If you haven't seen the film, I would suggest doing so before engaging with this piece. Spoilers are inherent in this kind of analysis, so if you choose to continue, I can't be responsible. Also, I want to make sure it's understood that this analysis is based on my own set of criteria and my own perspective on the film. I'm in no way attempting to argue with or invalidate any personal interpretation or analysis anyone has developed. My goal is to try and develop a deeper understanding of the material and see what I can take away from it. I encourage anyone to follow along in the film and check my work, as it were. And as always, I reserve the right to be wrong. Annihilation's plot follows a group of women investigating the Shimmer, a mysterious energy field that's been slowly expanding outward from the area of a meteor strike that occurred some years prior. Of the group, only Lena, played by Natalie Portman, has a personal investment as her soldier husband Kane, played by Oscar Isaac, a member of an earlier exploration team, has returned after a year's absence with no memory of where he's been or how he got home. Now mysteriously dying, Lena hopes the Shimmer holds the key to saving her husband's life. The film's themes of self-destruction cover several different variations, from the physical to the psychological. It's easy to understand those who engage in behavior that is damaging to them, their self-destruction coming from the damage to their bodies as well as to their emotional or psychological well-being. But beyond self-destruction, as in the knowing act of, the film also covers the destruction of the self. a breakdown of the immaterial or metaphysical concept of ourselves as a unique entity. Psychologically, there are often aspects of the self that we find are limiting or even harmful, and in order to become a better version of ourselves, we need to target those and destroy those aspects of ourself, often through guided therapy. And there are schools of thought that believe that the destruction of this concept of self, that we are somehow beings separate from each other and the universe, is necessary for human evolution. While by no means a comprehensive exploration of the subject, these are some of the types of self-destruction the film presents, all of them having a role in the overall arc of the story. Though the film has at least 6 primary roles, it mainly follows the experience of Portman's Lena. She is the character that takes us on this journey, so she is the character we look to for our story. The plot is delivered as a flashback combined with a perspective-based retelling as we are looking back on previous events through the recollections of Lena. When Lena begins her recollections, she's grieving the loss of her husband a year after his disappearance, and she admits to being unable to move past it. After her husband mysteriously returns, he quickly begins suffering from multiple organ failure. He is dying. Lena finds that her husband has been deployed to the Shimmer and deduces that her best chance to save his life is by entering the zone to look for answers, despite being told, besides her husband, no one has ever returned, sending the message that if she can't come back to her husband, she'd just as well not come back at all. As the film progresses, we find that the reason Lena became stuck after her husband's disappearance is because she was engaged in an extramarital affair, one she believes he discovered not long before he disappeared. Lena is experiencing a guilt and anger towards herself that she cannot resolve. But in the same scene we learn about this affair, we also learn that the relationship between Lena and Kane had somehow broken down, with Kane's long, secretive deployments putting a strain on their marriage. There are 2 primary questions to ask about Lena's story. What is it that she needs to overcome, and what happens that allows her to overcome it? Externally, we know what Lena is doing. Going into the Shimmer is an attempt to save her husband's life. Internally, we know the reason she wasn't able to move on when she thought he had died is because of the still present guilt and anger at herself. If what the character wants is to have her husband back in all respects, then what she's going to have to overcome is the feelings of guilt and anger she has about the affair. If we allow that the storytelling is leading us to believe that this version of Kane doesn't have the memories of the original, then he wouldn't know about the affair. And if we assume that Lena has deduced this as well, then she can't deal with her feelings by having it out with him. Not about his work leaving her lonely, and not about the affair. And at the end of the film, we know that Lena and Kane, this version of Kane, have connected and will have a chance to rekindle some semblance of that relationship. The next step is to investigate the storytelling to discover how it changes Lena to make this possible. Lena's emotional journey occurs within the fictional space of the Shimmer, and as the storytelling doesn't involve Lena dealing directly and literally with her issues, such as going to therapy or arguing it out or facing it in a conventional way, the film is taking us through Lena's emotional journey by way of metaphor. Within the metaphor, what's happening to Lena outwardly is, or at least is meant to be, some representation of what's happening to her internally. So what is the Shimmer? Within the text of the film, it's an area of unknown radiation that's rapidly deconstructing, fragmenting, scattering, and recombining DNA to create mutations and hybrids out of the organic material within it. In defiance of the film's title, the Shimmer isn't a place of destruction, it's a place of change, both literally in the text and metaphorically in terms of storytelling. And by entering the Shimmer, the storytelling is forcing the characters to face change, both literally and metaphorically. Change always involves some element of destruction, but in the best case, the purpose is to create something stronger or better adapted to a context or situation. Destruction is the gateway to change, and the characters introduced into this area whose purpose is to create change will face destruction of one kind or another. Whether or not they change seems dependent on who they are and what they want. There is at least implied storytelling in the film backing up the idea that while everyone is affected by the Shimmer, the end result is somehow consciously motivated on some level. Change is a choice, and the film reflects that in the characters. There are 6 primary characters in the film, and each of those 6 characters goes into the Shimmer with a specific kind of baggage. First are the primary characters of Kane, a man deeply in love with a woman but whose life is getting in the way of their relationship, and Lena, whose guilt has led her to punish herself and whose desire to save her husband is a search for some kind of forgiveness. In the secondary cast is Anya, a paramedic and recovering addict, Shepard, a woman fundamentally changed after the death of her daughter, Josie, a brilliant young woman whose disconnect from life leads to bouts of non-suicidal suicidal self-injury, and finally Ventress, a woman afflicted with cancer who wants to discover the secret of the shimmer before she dies. The storytelling has to build a foundation of logic for each of these characters, but their fates can be read as metaphorical answers to the challenge to change the film puts in front of them. Kane experiences a duplication in the shimmer, resulting in an almost perfect copy, but without his memories to an unspecified degree. The original Kane then uses a phosphorus grenade in an act of self-immolation. There are a couple of things we can read from this. First, we know that Kane loves Lena, but if he was in fact aware of the affair she had, which the storytelling implies, then his challenge is going to be how he resolves that knowledge with his feelings. There may also be some element of guilt on his part in the dissolution of their relationship. This is not specifically covered. The solution is either the conscious or unconscious creation of a duplicate unburdened by the memories of that life, but within which still lies the love Kane has for Lena. It's this unencumbered echo of himself he sends back to the world to find his wife. But that isn't all he does. The act of self-immolation can also be seen as a purification by fire, a cleansing of the person he was to make way for this new version of himself who is drawn back to Lena. The fates of the secondary characters are less explored but can still be read from this perspective should one choose. Shepard tells Lena that the day her daughter died, she lost two people, her daughter and the woman she used to be. The movie points to Shepard as reflective of Lena by having her point out the recognition that she carries a loss. Like Lena, Shepard is stuck in her grief, and it's that grief she brings into the shimmer. But unlike Lena, Shepard isn't in conflict. She's resigned herself to living in her grief and is unable or unwilling to answer the challenge to change. The result is not only her death, but the perpetuation of her internal cry for help in the mutated mouth of the bear that kills her. Storytelling logic implies this is an adaptation the bear took on for its own survival, while the metaphor might suggest that her inability to change means she will forever be trapped in her personal agony. We don't know very much about Anya before the shimmer, but of all the characters in the film, she's the one that reacts the strongest to Shepard's death, and she's the one lured in by the bear's mimicry of Shepard's voice, which ultimately leads to her own death. We don't know very much about Anya before the shimmer, but of all the characters in the film, she's the one that reacts the strongest to Shepard's death, and she's the one lured in by the bear's mimicry of Shepard's voice, which ultimately leads to her own death. Because we don't know anything about Anya, all we can do is speculate based on the little amount of information we have combined with her behavior. As a paramedic, it's her job to save lives, and substance abuse is usually an attempt to deal with or avoid dealing with something that's too much to bear. Anya's reaction to Shepard's death is to try and leave the shimmer, to run away. Similarly, the use of substances can be seen as an attempt to run away from an issue. If we're willing to speculate, perhaps Anya's addiction was a way to run away from a life she couldn't save or a way to run away from the concept of death itself. If we read her running after the sound of Shepard's voice as an inability to accept that death, we can take a step towards saying this is the challenge the character was faced with, either to accept death in some form or accept that there are those we can't save. Because she couldn't accept Shepard's death, she ran towards her own. Josie is described as a character who self-harms in order to feel alive. There are several reasons a person may choose to self-harm, and one of them is a feeling of emotional numbness. Josie is a passive character that doesn't seem to want anything, so she doesn't have anything driving her. She's recruited into the organization researching the shimmer right out of her PhD program, so she hasn't established herself as part of the world in that regard and, as far as we know, has no attachments. When the time comes, she chooses not to go forwards or backwards, not to fight or flee or even face the situation. Instead, she surrenders, choosing to change in a way in which she disappears into the landscape. As a person experiencing emotional numbness, most likely through no fault of her own, instead of pushing through that, she chooses to become something that doesn't feel. We're told Ventress, like Josie, has no family or friends, nothing in her life outside of her work. She's also dying and has decided that getting to the truth about the shimmer is going to be the last thing she does before she goes. There is no question what Ventress's fate will be, at least as far as the storytelling makes available. But instead of simply succumbing to the cancer, Ventress chooses to allow the shimmer to do what its alien inhabitant communicated was its goal, the fragmenting of her mind and body into their smallest parts. Ventress chooses annihilation, but instead of being erased from existence, she's transformed into energy, the very energy that will later form the duplicate Lena. We already know that Lena's challenge going into the Shimmer is her guilt and anger, and after confronting the being that emerges from the energetic remains of Ventress, Lena will literally have to face herself if she's going to escape. This duplicate begins to mirror Lena, preventing her attempts to escape and harming her when she attempts to strike it. So like her life, the thing that's standing in Lena's way is herself. She can't fight it, she can't run from it, she can't surrender to it, and she can't allow it to destroy her because unlike those that entered the Shimmer with her, she has something to live for. In order for Lena to get back to her life, she must literally and metaphorically destroy the version of herself that's standing in her way. This is one of many examples of the concept of self-destruction, or destruction of self, present in the film. But because she's faced herself and destroyed the part of her that was preventing her from moving on, only Lena will come out of the experience in the Shimmer as a changed person, again, both physically and metaphorically. While there are certainly clear themes of self-destruction or destruction of the self, the film's story isn't simply about a character who self-destructs. Lena goes into the Shimmer, this place of change, as a person who cannot move past a certain obstacle in her life. Now, everything in her life is different. Everything about her life has changed except the one thing she wanted to keep, the love between her and her husband. There has been destruction, but this destruction has led to a renewal, a second chance. This is what the Ouroboros symbol, the tattoo that Anya and eventually Lena had on their arms, represents in many cultures. Twisted into an infinity loop, the serpent eating itself represents an endless cycle of destruction and rebirth. So the question still remains, what, if anything, is the story of Annihilation, and is that what the film is about? In this analysis, the story of Annihilation is the story of a woman held in place by guilt and anger who must find a way to move beyond that to have a chance at reestablishing her relationship with her husband. The obstacle in her way is the challenge to change, to get past the person she is, to be someone who can have the life she wants. The story is then told through the use of a sci-fi metaphor. Gathering all the facets of the storytelling together and applying them to a resolution of the story, we can come to the conclusion that the movie isn't about self-destruction, but about the various ways that destruction can lead to change if we're willing to face it. Beyond analysis, I feel at its heart, Annihilation is a love story. When I filter all this information through my personal perspective, what I see is a story about a woman who loves someone so much she was willing to face the destruction of everything she is and the end of the world itself for a chance to save them. And in doing so, she was able to change and become someone who could return to that relationship. If you really want to get at what the film is about, it's about how love gives us the strength to face anything, even ourselves. The one thing that most separated Lena from the other women in her squad is that Lena had a reason to return from the Shimmer. She had a reason to face herself and whatever changes were to come. There's nothing particularly intellectual about this, but neither do I feel it invalidates or contradicts any of the previous analysis. It's all a matter of perspective, and I just happen to prefer to look at the story as more solidly emotionally driven. Annihilation, true annihilation, is an ending. It's the total obliteration of a thing, virtually wiping it out from all existence. But when I watch Annihilation, the movie, all I see is change. Strange, frightening, and dangerous change, but change all the same. Maybe I'm biased towards a story that sees damaged love repaired, the romantic in me needing to find a silver lining in all the destruction. But Annihilation is an end to something, and what I see is a continuation and a rebirth. Is there life after Annihilation? Maybe it depends on where you draw the line between life and existence. The law of conservation of energy tells us that energy can neither be created or destroyed. It can only be changed. If all things are, in their most minute parts, just condensed energy, then annihilation can only lead to change. It's an undeniable fact of existence, like the idea that if two people love each other enough, they can find a way to make a relationship work. It might not be how they envisioned it, and it may come through the pain of destroying what they once had, but I like to believe that there are some things that can never truly be destroyed. As long as some small part survives, it can become something else. What that is may not always be up to us, but we can't fight it, and we shouldn't be afraid of it. This has been the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion. As always, I have been Gray, and if you like what you heard, you can leave a tip at our Ko-Fi page at ko-fi.com/notthepopularopinion. You can follow us on Twitter at @only_Gray, and don't forget our main page at notthepopularopinion.wordpress.com, where you'll find more great articles just like this. Thanks again for listening, and remember, if you're as good to others as you are to yourself, we might just make it through this mess. See ya.